Hello there, I'm P.2 Ronin Beatmaker, and welcome to Lounge Ronin. All things, everything. And before we get into it, if you're new to the channel, please make sure to subscribe, like, and ring that notification bell. And please feel free to leave a comment with your thoughts below and some constructive criticism, as that will help me and the channel grow and improve. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. And on this episode, we're going to discuss, did the giants build the pyramids? Now, if you didn't catch part one, no worries. There'll be a quick refresher at the beginning of this article. But I highly recommend after this, you jump into part one and take a listen. And afterwards, leave a comment and, feel free to do some research of your own and explore. This is a very interesting topic, and I'm looking forward to sharing it with you and sharing my thoughts, perspectives, and hopefully yours as well. Okay. All right. So this was written September 6, 2017 by Hugh Newman. The Giants of Ancient Egypt, Part 2. Physical Evidence of Giant Characteristics. In part 1 of this giant investigation, inspired by the report of the find of a so-called giant Egyptian pharaoh who stood about 5 inches, 13 centimeters taller than the average ancient Egyptian, Hugh Newman brings to light evidence of more substantial giants in Egyptian history. Here we see some of the more credible physical evidence that hints at the existence of much larger than average Egyptians. A giant king over 8 feet tall. Now, I apologize ahead of time if my pronunciation is not the correct. Some of these are pretty much a tongue twister, but I will do my best. Okay, King Askamu, 2690 BC, was the final ruler of the second dynasty of Egypt, based near Abydos, and was involved in the construction of Heracleopolis, the pre-dynastic capital. This is the same site where the previously mentioned gigantic knife was discovered. He was buried at the necropolis at el Kawab, in what was once described as the earliest stone structure in Egypt. The large limestone tomb was not sophisticated in any way, and when Professor Robert Temple investigated the site in 2001, he was amazed that the quality of the construction was so primitive, especially compared to the step pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara, which has been dated to the start of the Third Dynasty, just a few years later. Djoser was also thought to have buried Kaskmatwu at the site before moving north to the area of Saqqara. Now, that's really interesting. Now, I did actually, funny enough, do an article covering the dynastic races of Egypt, which was, well, not dynastic race of Egypt, but the dynastic races that were, that you could say inhabited Earth pre-deluge. And I highly recommend you check that out if you are interested in it. Okay. Here we have are the mortuary buildings at Hieroconopolis. Here. The bottom is the burial site and a map of cemetery. Now these are the areas that were supposedly built by the giant Egypt. Casamacu's skeleton was never found, suggesting it was looted long before the excavation. The second dynasty king is unique in Egyptian history, as having both the symbols of Horus and the Set on his sekaf. Some Egyptologists believe that this was an attempt to unify the two factions. But after his death, Set was dropped from the sect permanently. He was the earliest Egyptian king known to have built statues of himself. But the most startling thing about this pharaoh was the fact that he was something of a giant. Builders Pite, who first excavated the site, found evidence from the 3rd century BC that he was 5 cubits and 3 palms high, which would be about 8 English feet. If the short cubit of 17.4 inches were used, in the most recent translation of Metheno, it is said he was 5 cubits and 3 palms, 8½ feet tall. Metheno is believed to have been an Egyptian priest from Sebennytus, who lived during the Ptolemaic era in the early 3rd century BC and wrote about this giant in, oh boy, Ayapataka, History of Egypt, a book written at the request of Ptolemy II of Philadelphus. Philadelphus. Interesting. Now, if I remember correctly, the book, The History of Egypt, it might be one of the earliest books in terms of just uh, chronological history of a country, which is interesting that it would be that there's more than one documented evidence of this pharaoh being mentioned being a giant. And if you are no stranger to the whole stories and themes of giants, then you'll be aware that giants have been spoken about, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's in Africa now, North America. It seems to be quite prevalent throughout the world, these stories and histories and interactions with giants. As to what that means, who knows? But I think there is some, you could argue and say that there is some obvious truth to these stories if they're well documented and there is evidence to point to them being people who actually existed. But that is for you to make up your own mind and decision. All right, here we go. However, if we use the royal cubit, his height increases to 14 feet 7 inches tall. Considering he was a king, perhaps the royal cubit should be considered. But this kind of statue is well out the normal range of humans. So, although tantalizing and correlating with other accounts, the more conservative height range of 8 feet to 8 feet 6 inches is much more likely. A statue of him on display at the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, but it does not give details about how tall he was. This is the statue. Now, if anything, we could make the speculation that he was a descendant from giants, and that could explain his abnormal height. So far, it doesn't seem like there talking about him having any sort of physical abnormally at abnormalities that that we've seen with people who are like who are over 8 feet tall and they're massive. That's not always the case. Some cases it's just genetics, but it is a funny correlation to point out. Okay, a, a pharaoh Casakamel Casac Camul was said to have ruled for 48 years and united Upper and Lower Egypt during his reign. Perhaps he was feared as a king of his stature, must have been very influential, and towered over his contemporaries and his enemies. It is also important to note that the earliest inscriptional evidence of an Egyptian king at the Lebanese site of Balbus belonged to the reign of Casamatmul. So, I mean, I don't know if, I can't recall in any documentaries I've seen in the past about, Egypt and their pharaohs. They never mentioned this pharaoh and they never mentioned his height. So, something to keep in mind for anyone out there as well. Okay, now this is the Osiris at Abydos showing sophisticated stone construction. This reminds me, and if you look in um, the back stones, you'll see what look like nubs. And these nubs are you see them everywhere in any of these really high, sophisticated, advanced stone structural buildings. And this here of itself reminds me very similar to some of the stone structures that you find in Peru and Bolivia, which then you could make a an argument to say that perhaps there was a at one time or at many a times a worldwide civilization. It's in part one I talk about how there are pyramids in Indonesia. Well, there's a pyramid in Indonesia. There are multiple pyramids in China, and they may actually be larger and bigger than the pyramids in Egypt. There is a pyramid remain in Greece, and it may be several hundred years earlier than the pyramid in Egypt. So, these are things just to kind of keep in mind and kind of ask yourself as to why these particular things are not discussed as frequently. Um, and, most often or not, it's due to the narrative that's being told. The mainstream narrative, whether it's for, archaeology, anthropology, whatever you name it, there's that narrative, and if you step outside the narrative, you're ostracized, you're blacklisted, you're exiled. Look at, Graham Hancock for one person example, Randall Carlson. There's so many people to name who have been, exiled from their fields of study because they went against the narrative. Interestingly, the famous Abydos king list is carved on the Seti I temple at Abydos, and depictions from the 19th century dynasty shows a larger than life Seti represented as about 8 feet tall. In a strange twist, Kasakamul was omitted from the final list, as were certain other early notable kings, who were apparently considered illegitimate. The Abydos king list is a list of names of 76 kings of ancient Egypt, found on a wall of the temple of Seti I at Abydos, Egypt. The list omits the names of several pharaohs such as Hasakamul. Now, what's interesting about this as well is that if look at photos or videos, or if you've been to Egypt, there are a lot of these um, statues of a certain pharaoh. And the weird thing about this pharaoh is that all of the his nose is destroyed on all of his statues. Now, it could be, and this is just me that kind of popped into my head, but I'm wondering if those, since this since uh since K was the first king to enact statues of himself, is it possible that he was the one whose face was destroyed on all of these statues? I apologize if you hear my dog in the background. He's an old man and he's having some allergy issues at the moment. But I find this very interesting that they were considered illegitimate, and I'm curious as to why that is. All right. Depiction of a giant at Saqqara. The third dynasty saw the Great Pyramid of Saqqara built with numerous other temples in the complex. Djoser, who buried the gigantic king K and may have been his son, was the ruler of Saqqara during its construction. Within the complex, a painting of a giant who clearly appears to have an elongated skull was photographed by Egyptologist Zahi Hawass. Examining it, he does not look into it pleased. He does not look too pleased. However, this could be a depiction of the skeletons that were excavated by Emery in 1930s of individuals with bigger skulls, bills larger than native population. Now, this is very, very interesting. Now, I recently, well, actually not recently, but months ago, I did a video discussing the elongated skull bloodline in which every US president is related to. And I also did a video discussing another article about the Cornwall Museum in the UK and them having documented evidence from the early 18th century confirming that there was a humanoid species of humans that lived in South America and that predated humans. And now here you have this story regarding the potentiality that King K um, was humanoid and may have had an elongated skull. Now, this could further confirm as to why would confirm further as to why the noses of his statues, if it's the same king, would be destroyed, as he was not considered legitimate because he wasn't pure blood, I guess. He wasn't of the people. So, we can infer and make that speculation that the fact that he wasn't of pure blood, he wasn't of humans, he was a separate species, and that perhaps the human species, they were tired of being ruled by these humanoid elongated skull giants and overthrew them. It's entirely possible. And perhaps over time, his descendants, their reign weakened. It's just interesting to me that, and I didn't even know that they uncovered elongated skulls in Egypt. Does anyone know about this? Like, I feel like I gotta tell people that this is crazy. And I don't know if there's a photo of it. We're gonna scroll down to see if there's an actual photo of this. Oh shit! Oh shit! Oh smokes! There it is. Zahi an archaeologist, expecting a depiction of a possible giant at Saqqara in 2007. Yeah, he does not look happy. And if you know anything about Zahi Hawass, that man hates anything that has to do with anyone else building the pyramids other than Egyptians. Like, this man is as mainstream as a narrative as you can get, and he has been accused of selling antiquities. He's a corrupt individual who's all about pushing the narrative and suppressing any knowledge that contradicts the narrative that he has put forth in regards to who built the pyramids. Um, and there you go. Case in point, that picture. But okay, so you have the picture of this, but we scroll back up. It says here that yeah, it says here, however, this could be a depiction of the skeletons that were excavated um, by Emery in the 1930s. So my question is, if there were elongated skulls found in um in Egypt, where are those remains? I mean, where are the remains? Are these the same remains that the Cornwall Museum has in the UK? I mean, it's just something to take into consideration, that the fact that there were elongated skulls that were found in Egypt, yet there's no mention of them anywhere. I've never heard about this. This is news to me. This carving down here with Zahi Hawass is new to me as well. But like I was saying, I mean, this man is corrupt as hell in terms of Egyptian antiquity. So it wouldn't surprise me if he even knows. It would not surprise me if he knows about these elongated skulls that were found, and was hoping that there was no other evidence to further confirm their existence. Yet here they are. Yet here is a picture of it. This is To me, this is very interesting and very alarming, because it just seems like, and this article is from 2016, and this photo was taken in 2007. So there has to be knowledge of there has to be knowledge, and there has to be the physical evidence of these elongated skulls, whether or not they are in the warehouse basements of the Egyptian museums, or if it's located in the UK. I mean, this is what's just so fascinating to me. The fact that they're all, that they did recover, elongated skulls and skeletons, but they're nowhere have they been presented to us. Please ignore some of the ads. I know they're a bit ridiculous. The giants of the Temple of Isis. This unusual story was reported in multiple newspapers in 1895 and 1896, but we feature the earliest and most complete version. The photo is a reconstruction of the Temple of Isis, where the account originated from. It originally appeared in the Arizona Silver Belt, November 16, 1895, with the headline Prehistoric Egyptian Giants. In 1881, when Professor Timmerman was engaged in exploring the ruins of an ancient temple of Isis on the banks of the Nile, 16 miles below Najar Defard, he opened a row of tombs in which some prehistoric race of giants have been buried. The smallest skeleton, um, the smallest skeleton out of some 60 odd, which were examined during the time Timmerman was excavating at Najar Defard, measured 7 feet and 8 inches in length and the largest 11 feet 1 inch. Memorial tablets were discovered in great numbers, but there is no record that even hinted that they were in the memory of men of extraordinary size. It is believed that the tombs date back to the year 1043 BC. Well, well, well. There you have it. Confirmation. Confirmation of their existence. Take that as you will. Take that information as you will. But if what's so funny about this is that all if you were to look up old newspaper cuttings, and there's a researcher who's documenting all of this, and many of these older newspaper articles and breaking news talk about giants, talk about all these strange anomalies, underground cities, and then they're gone, they vanish. So this to me is not surprising. The question now that needs to be answered is, where are these 60 some odd giant bones? What happened to them? Where are they? Who has them? That's the question that needs to be answered. Now here is the actual article. Look at it right here, so you can read it for your with your own eyes. And then here is the Temple of Isis on the Philae Island with the newspaper account detailing the discovery of giants. So, I mean, it's right there for you. So please feel free to pause it and read this as well. There is no more information about this report, but it was repeated in the Arizona Weekly Citizen February 1st, 1896, and several other newspapers. Here we go. The mummified finger of a 16-foot tall giant. Yes, I remember this story. Photo of the mummified finger with measurements. According to the German newspaper BLD Day, a Swiss nightclub owner named Gregor Spory took a number of photographs of a mummified giant finger in 1988. The owner was a retired grave robber who was based in the district of Bir Hooker, near Sadat City, about 100 kilometers, 62.14 miles north of Cairo. The finger is nearly 14 inches long, and it is genuine. It belonged to someone estimated to have been 15 and 16 feet tall, or someone with oversized hands. However, the discovery was only revealed on March 9th, 2012, 24 years later, and since then there has been no official rebuff to the discovery. Naguib told Gregor that it was found about 150 years ago and had been kept in the family, who had even gone to the trouble of getting the finger x-rayed to confirm its authenticity in the 1960s. Spory had to pay $300 to see the mummified finger and take pictures. Now, Gabe refused to tell Spory where he found the finger, but made allusions to a hidden room in the basement of the Great Pyramid, where huge empty graves are located. Naguib made it clear that the relic was not for sale and it was too important to Naguib's family. Before he returned to his hotel, Spory took a number of photos where he put a banknote next to the finger in order to indicate the size. Now, I have always suspected, and I've heard multiple accounts of there being catacombs and libraries underneath the the Sphinx. Now, this retired grave robber is saying that it's from a hidden room in the basement of the Great Pyramid. That's also possible as well. But I've heard about this giant finger. I never knew that it originated from Egypt. That I think is absolutely fascinating and very telling. But it just goes to tell you that as Graham Hancock says, we really are a species with amnesia. And not only that, we truly don't know the origins, of our planet. Who occupied our planet prior to us. And here you have, verified, and documented evidence of a giant's finger, and the giant was said to have been 15 to 16 feet tall. It's no different than the incident that happened in Afghanistan with those special forces operatives that ended up killing a giant, or the stories of Native Americans accounts of being hunted by giants in North America. I mean, there are so many stories regarding giants that, to say that they're not real and it's folklore, then explain to me why there are multiple different areas around the entire world describing giants. And if you want to say they don't have any interactions with one another, fine, but please explain that. This is, in my opinion, to me, this is really interesting and fascinating information. Um, and there are so many stories and evidence of these kind of anomalies and historical you know breakthroughs that one has to wonder why it's never talked about in the news. It's never celebrated. You're not going to see in the history books, especially in Western society, you're not going to see this information being added into, the teachings in regards to ancient Egypt. So, it's just, this is just probably, this is just some fascinating stuff, and it's just very telling of our world and history. The problem is, 19 years later, he went back to Egypt to locate the gentleman. This is a guy, and this is in regards to the man who has the supposed giant finger. But he could not find Nagib, and no one knew where he was. A DNA sample would have been useful, but the X-ray, the detailed photographs, and his thorough depiction do hint that this was a genuine mummified finger. Sporo observed the finger in detail and was able to determine that what he was holding was old, organic, and humanoid. The finger looked like it had been cut off with anatomical precision, and in some places was crumbled. The leathery skin was ripped in places, and the skin was a few millimeters thick. Between the dry skin folds, he could see remains of fungus, and the nail was loose. The surface of the skin was damaged in some places, as if mice had gnawed on it. The bone felt woody. The photos and X-rays were examined by professionals who could see no evidence of fakery. So there's more information to confirm the legitimacy of this giant's finger. Million Mummy, a Million Mummy Cemetery reveals 7-foot skeleton. Cemetery called Bag el Gamos, which means Way of the Water Buffalo, and a nearby pyramid have been excavated by archaeologists from Brigham Young University for the last 30 years. Many of the mummies that were discovered date to the time when the Roman or Byzantine Empire ruled Egypt, from the 1st century to the 7th century AD. The pyramid, however, may date back to 2500 BC, the time the Giza pyramids were being constructed. We are fairly certain we have over a million burials within this cemetery. It's large and it's dense. Project director Carrie Molstein, an associate professor in the Department of Ancient Scripture at Brigham Young University, said in a paper he presented at the Society for the Study of Egyptian Antiquities, Scholars, and Colloquium, which was held in November 2014 in Toronto. However, it is now thought, as of 2017, that it is more likely to be tens of thousands of graves. One discovered that never got officially published that was of a mummy who was more than 7 feet tall. We once found a male who was over 7 feet tall, who was far tall to fit into, who was too tall to fit into the shaft. So they bent him in half and tossed him in. Good Lord. Damn. Tell me how you really feel. The small pyramid that dates to around 2000 BC, the same area as the Great Pyramid of Giza. The amount of burials next to such a small settlement has raised many questions, especially because the pyramid is at least 2,500 years older than the cemetery. Contemporary with the Saqqara and the earliest phases of the Great Pyramid, the huge quantity of bodies that ended up here remains a mystery. Were they brought in from other areas because this was a sanctified zone, or is there another reason? Either way, within days of this story going to the press, the archaeologists were told to halt excavations by Egyptian officials and their licenses to dig were revoked. The department will suspend any archaeological mission if its director neglects to immediately notify the office of any new discoveries, the rules stipulate. Was it halted because they were revealing the giants of ancient Egypt to the world? Now, you see, this is not the first time that the Egyptian officials suppress new information about Egypt and the pyramids. I mean, look at Graham Hancock. He's been essentially banned from going to Egypt because of um, his research and what his data has presented. Whether it's the fact the water erosion on the Sphinx. There are so many things that Egyptian officials, at the behest of the narrative, those the educational elites, the scholar elites who control the narrative of world history, they don't want that kind of information put out there because it contradicts the narrative. So it's no surprise to me that, um, and it's like it's only over 7 feet tall. It's not even pushing 8. I mean, it's Yao Ming size. It's we're talking um, Shaq size. But I think the problem is that they were afraid because they knew or suspected that if they kept on digging, they're gonna find bigger and bigger skeletal remains. And it's no surprising that we go all the way back up, right? To here, this giant finger that is told to be from a giant that is over 15 or 16 feet tall. The finger is nearly 14 inches long, and it was found by a grave robber who says he got it in a hidden tomb under the Great Pyramid. Now, the whole thing with the grave robbers, and this is one thing that's so frustrating and disappointing about, the grave robbery is, think of all of the private um galleries and museums that these ruling elites throughout the world have, and how such galleries and personal private museums have archaeological evidence that would completely and utterly rewrite our history. I mean, it's no surprise. And these are things that we as individuals out there, free thinking individuals, we need to keep in mind that, how much of these looters were selling this stuff to ruling elites, or selling it to institutions to ensure that this information was never discovered. I mean, the Smithsonian had to admit to destroying giant bones remains. I mean, if you think that this is just an isolated incident to just the Egyptian officials, you're foolish. This is encompassing every institution, every type of institutional narrative is being ruled and being controlled, and suppressing anyone that provides new information that goes against the mainstream narrative, that can push our understanding of our humanity, of our race, of our species, of our history, to better us in the future and in the present. But they don't want that. They want us ignorant and docile and complacent. There is no indication if the giant mummy had any signs of gigantism, but it gives yet more credence to the idea that giants did live and thrive in ancient Egypt, whether they were pharaohs with elaborate burials or folded up and thrown down holes in the desert. Giants in Egyptian art. In this next image, we can see various examples of Egyptian inscriptions and art that appear to represent giants next to people of smaller stature. Some caught my attention, while others could simply be adults with children or art to glorify themselves, which I think is also entirely possible. But then some of these, especially this one right here with the elongated skull, and for those of you who are just joining, as I peeped and see we got some viewers. We talked about the elongated skulls that were found in Egypt, and this right here is very telling. The researcher Muhammad Abdu compiled most of the images in the above compilation. Please take a look for yourself, as it is difficult to tell if these are realistic depictions or artistic impressions, but they are worth noting anyway. Now, I can't say much about any of these, but like I said about this one right here on the far, far left with the elongated skull, that one to me is very curious. Giant sarcophagi of Egypt. Good Lord. Look at these. Have you ever seen anything like that before? No, they're massive. According to some researchers, gigantic coffins are proof of giants in Egypt. I have seen a few on my travels, but it simply could be the case that they made them bigger than required to impress others, or to make it clear to the gods in the afterlife that they were of royal stock. Some examples, however, do pose a few awkward questions. The Serpent near Saqqara is composed of 25 massive granite and dolerite coffins weighing up to 70 tons each, and mummified Apis bulls were sealed in them as part of an ancient cult. One bull was found, but only one which has led to speculation that the rest of them were once used for giant humans. Another huge sarcophagus is located under the Giza Plateau in what is called the Osiris Shaft. Heard of the Osiris Shaft? Yes. It is partly submerged underwater. It is rarely visited or photographed and is deep beneath the stone causeway of the so-called Hafiz Pyramid. The alabaster coffin of Seti I is 9 feet and 4 inches tall, 4 inches long, and is currently housed in the Sonnet Museum in London. He was also larger than life figure as depicted by the Abydos King list, and with the massiveness of his coffin, you would jump to the conclusion that he must have been a very tall pharaoh. Now here's a picture of the 9-foot tall alabaster coffin of Seti I, now on display at the Swan Museum in London. However, his mummy was also discovered and it measured 5 feet 7 inches tall. So even though there were giant coffins and artistic impressions of very tall Egyptians, it does not mean that they represent actual human giants. Gigantism in ancient Egypt. We began our survey with, well, the smallest giant discovered in ancient Egypt, who just happens to match the height of 16 feet and 1.5 inches. Even at this meager height, Michael Habbage and his colleagues have concluded that Sadnach probably suffered from giganticism after they realized the aligned skull and bones of the pharaoh. They said the skeleton's long bones showed evidence of exuberant growth, which are clear signs of giganticism. So this is the real reason he got labeled a giant, not because of his staggering stature. In fact, he probably would have been tall enough to make a baseball team today. A typical NBA center stands in the 7-foot range. There are few accounts of giganticism in historical record, so this is interesting in and of itself. Most of the accounts seem to indicate a normal human skeletal frame without any signs of pituitary irregularity. So these are, this is Sadnach, and he was suffering from giganticism. Anyways, these discoveries presented in this article, it is simply builds the case for the existence of giants in prehistoric Egypt and around the world. And the more we explore the records of each country, the more examples we find. Some of those included in this article are not particularly tall, but it does strengthen the idea that those who were born with giant genes were honored and respected and were part of the royal bloodlines of the very early rulers of ancient Egypt. It may even shed light on how such large stones were quarried and lifted into place, as only giants, very advanced technology, or ingenious architects could have achieved such a gargantuan task. Now here is a video presented by the writer Hugh Newman, and it's 5,000-year-old giant Egyptian artifacts.
So we're here at the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, and one of the reasons we're here is to see some giant artifacts from ancient Egypt, which may prove once and for all that giants ruled Egypt in pre-dynastic times, going right back to the time of the Scorpion King. So here we have, not only do we have a boomerang from Egypt in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, we also have a giant flint knife. And you just see the size of that compared to my hand. You can see that it is pretty big. So this is from Hierakonpolis in excavations in 1897 to 1899, very early dynastic period. But these were buried deliberately beneath the temple by the later dynasties. But this massive flint knife, the unwieldy size, does suggest that indeed giants were doing their thing in Egypt. And then with this Australian looking boomerang, how bizarre is this? Found in the same place, again buried beneath the temple, as so to hide it. So we have evidence of giants from Egypt in the Ashmolean Museum. You can clearly see this huge flint knife, just see the size of it compared to my hand, on display in the extremely early dynastic period. So these are the oversized mace heads. And what's amazing about this, these represent the first king, the first pharaoh, Nama, or the scorpion king from ancient Egypt. And massive wooden poles would have been placed in these. So whether these were actually used by the giant kings, then we have evidence that there are certainly giants. You can see that over there with the great knife blade. Does suggest that indeed the earliest kings, the pre-dynastic kings and pharaohs of Egypt may well have been giants. And we're going to see if we can find more evidence of that as we explore ancient Egypt.
Well, there you have it. Honestly, truly interesting stuff. Apologies about that. You know, this is really fascinating stuff to me, honestly, and I highly recommend uh, anyone out there who's listening, if you really enjoyed this, check out my dynastic race series, part 1 and 2, because in that one I definitely talk about the pre-dynastic races of old, and the essential, reconstruction of humanity, or I shouldn't really say humanity, but the reconstruction of Earth, post deluge. Apologies, Pablo. My dog right now he's got allergies and he's sneezing up a storm. But as I was saying, is in that series, I think that there's definitely some cooperating connections here, because this whole idea of the first, pharaohs, the pre-dynastic pharaohs of Egypt being giants is interesting, because you look into the information of the ancient rulers in Peru and Bolivia, and especially when they're talking about the fact that they found elongated skulls in Egypt, and Peru and Bolivia is just riddled with countless amounts of elongated skulls. The whole idea of there once being a worldwide civilization that predated our version. I mean, I think there's definitely some arguments to be made to that case. And it's only it's only by individuals like Hugh Newman and other people, Brian Forrester, Graham Hancock, many of these people out there who are more than willing to put their careers, their reputations, their neck on the line to get us this information and to ensure that future generations are able to find the inspiration and courage to continue to pursue these fascinating tales of our history. Why, I think for all of us, we have to kind of ask ourselves, why are they constantly suppressing these fantastical stories? Why are they constantly denying us the ability to further research, to further discover, to further uncover these mysteries? What are they so afraid of us learning? What are they so afraid of us knowing? I'm sure some of it will because they don't want it to hurt their bottom end. I know most of it is because they want to control us and how we think, how we feel, how we interact with one another, how we interact with this world. And I know, with the way things are going now, more than ever, the hive mind is at its most strongest and prevalent, and you're seeing so many people become susceptible to the hive mind that information like this, even if there is data and evidence to provide that it's factual, they will still deny it as being nothing more than lies. It's how funny is it that the truth is considered a lie, and the lie now is the truth. It's truly astounding, and it is unfortunate. But I do have hope that individuals like myself and many others out there who are willing to read these articles, put this information out there for others to make their own conclusions and to do their own research. I'm not saying I'm some super soldier of this, but it does feel good to put this information out there and let anyone else listen and make their own judgments and do their own research. And I feel that for me, I've always been suspicious of our history, of the world history. And as I have gotten older and more willing to be open-minded with the knowledge and information that I get and take my time to really process it and reflect it, I start to feel more comfortable and confident in my ability to research and weed through the nonsense or the BS or the programming and look really for the genuine truth. And sometimes it's uncomfortable and it will humble you most often than not. And I think that's one of the joyful things about doing your own research and looking into our ancient past, whether it's North America or any other country. It's not like you're not going to learn or take anything from it. I mean, here we are discussing about Egypt, and with all the information that we've covered today, someone's going to take something from it and be inspired by it, or they're going to be like, man, this boy is crazy, he don't know what he's talking about, his goofy tinfoil hat is on too tight. But I think it's important for us to humor ideas, and I also think it's important for us to listen to people we don't necessarily agree with and engage in information that we don't necessarily agree with. Even if that information that we are engaging in is the truth and we don't like it, we still can learn from it and we can still value it. I don't think it's beneficial for us as individuals to deny our individual self the improvement of learning about what it means to be human. And that is kind of the the point with many of these researchers and these articles out there. It's to further our understanding of what does it mean to be human, because the more and more information comes out, the more and more we don't even know what it means to be human. And it turns out there were other types of humans. So what does that mean? We're so hell bent and so hung up on on race that we don't even take the time to think about, man, there used to be other humanoid species that inhabited and thrived on this planet. If you believe in the planet, if you believe in a flat earth, okay, good for you. All right, if you believe we live in a hologram, right on. If you think we live in a concave hollow earth, I'm right there with you. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that we need to challenge our belief systems. We need to challenge the foundations of our belief systems, because that's the only way we can grow. You know, I was over here when I first caught on to this whole idea of giants building the pyramids. I'm like, I don't know about that. I'm more under the impression that it was a highly advanced civilization that used sound technology to build the pyramids, because of, when you look at how far the quarries were in terms of where the limestone came from to build the pyramids, it was like 800 miles away. So I'm like, I'm sure, they didn't have a couple hundred giants just lugging, 800-ton limestone on their backs for 800 miles. Or how many miles, I forgot. Like 800 miles. I forgot how many tons each block was. But the point that I'm making is that, there has to have been, if we're going to go down that route, a combination, perhaps, highly advanced technology and giants with a combination. I mean, it's just so funny to me. For me personally, when I research these things and I see the patterns and the quality of the patterns and how they're consistent, and how said consistency in those quality of patterns start building a more inclusive and open and true narrative, one that can be changed and involved with new information that might improve the narrative, rather than what we are being fed and shoved down our throats, which is the regurgitated same old nonsense. And there's nothing to gain from that regurgitation, of that reprocessed narrative. It poisons our mind, it poisons our ability to think for ourselves, to be able to do our own research, to be willing to be open to these, ideas and concepts that may seem otherworldly. But if there's so much data and evidence to prove that this otherworldliness was grounded in some form of reality, we have to be open minded to that, and we can't be complacent. And many people right now, you're seeing so many individuals who are complacent in their belief system. And the unfortunateness of being complacent in your belief system is that that becomes your domestication. You become domesticated by your belief system, so much so that it ends up causing self sabotage within your own personal relationships, within your own mental health, within your own physical health. And these are the issues that are presented, that I see when people are suppressed or harassed or bullied for questioning the narrative and going outside of the narrative. And that's and case in point, you see people, lose their livelihoods from the whole pandemic to institutions of education. You're seeing it all around you. The need to suppress any information that goes against the narrative, that goes against the truth. And it's an unfortunate side effect of being in a climate that is being ruled by such evil forces, such cruel, manipulative, evil forces. But, I have hope, like I said. As the veil continues to be unveiled, I believe that people will continue to stand up and rise up. And I'm one of those people. And I advocate for individuality. I advocate for freedom of consent. I advocate for informed consent. And I advocate for being human. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Lounge Ronin, all things, everything. And if you made it this far and you've enjoyed this episode, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. And please make sure to leave a comment with your thoughts below and some constructive criticism, as that will help the channel grow. And any suggestions for future topics. And until next time, stay positive, stay focused, stay true, and much love.